just illusion, manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Rippin' Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Hello. Hello. This is My Life DIY, and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Rippin' Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Darkwolf's Den.
The Darkwolf's Den Show on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. That's right. We're ripping through the electromagnetic soup, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Darkwolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it is, of course, St. Patrick's Day, and we will be celebrating St. Patrick's Day tonight, from the humble origins of the holiday up to the paranormal creatures like the leprechauns that tend to mark the holiday so well. We'll get into all that and more here in just a moment, but first, today in history. On this day in 1905, Albert Einstein finishes his scientific paper detailing his quantum theory of light. This would go on to become one of the foundations of modern physics. He did that on this day in 1905, and that is today's Today in History. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Looks like Albert Einstein had a bit of the luck of the Irish with him on this day in 1905. That's right. Speaking of luck of the Irish, ladies and gentlemen, it is St. Patrick's Day, and I do hope that you're wearing your green out there tonight. I know I definitely am, even though I'm in studio by myself. It's still nice to celebrate the holiday, right? Still, just the same, ladies and gentlemen, what is the holiday about? What is St. Patrick's Day? I know it's a reason to go out and get drunk. That's what it always was here in America. But what is the real meaning behind St. Patrick's Day? Who was St. Patrick? What does it even mean? Well, we're going to touch on all that here in the first half, and in the second half, we're going to get in and talking about our little friends, the Leprechauns. So make sure you stick around and stay tuned for the whole episode. It's definitely something you do not want to miss. Speaking of things you do not want to miss, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this party started. That's right. So without any further ado, here is some very well unknown facts about St. Patrick himself.
St. Patrick was born not in Ireland, but in Britain around AD 35. Well, actually, he wasn't called St. Patrick at the time, or even Patrick, but was referred to as Maewyn Succat. Good thing he changed his name later. St. Maewyn's Day just doesn't have the same ring.
No, I think I prefer St. Patrick's Day to St. Maewyn's Day. What about you guys?
We'll stick with Patrick, just in case I'm slaughtering that pronunciation. Patrick was quite far from being a saint growing up. Until he was 16, he considered himself a pagan, or maybe even an atheist by today's definition.
So even the most saintly of people don't necessarily start out being the most saintly of people.
It was at that age when he was taken into slavery by a group of Irish marauders that attacked his village. Patrick was sold to his master, a druid chief in Ireland, and served him for 6 years. It was during his captivity that he became a Christian.
Now, is that not a classic story? Finding God in jail, right? How many criminals have found God, right? That's interesting. He was in captivity when he became a Christian. That's really interesting. That's a pattern that still yet remains to this day.
One day he heard what he described as a voice compelling him in his sleep to leave his master and find a ship that awaited him. He fled to the coast of Ireland and eventually made it back to his home. He then decided to study in the monastery and stayed there for 12 years, during which he decided that his calling was to convert the pagans to Christianity. Eventually, he adopted his Christian name, Patricius, or Patrick as we now know it, and returned to Ireland after being appointed a bishop.
I gotta say, St. Patrick does sound a lot better than St. Maewyn.
Patrick was very successful at winning converts, which upsetted the Celtic druids, who had him arrested several times, but he managed to escape each arrest. Patrick traveled through Ireland, establishing monasteries, schools, and churches throughout the land. Eventually, Patrick returned to where he had once been a slave, to pay his ransom to his former master. Despite being treated cruelly, Patrick didn't hold a grudge against him. As Patrick approached his master's old homestead, to his horror he saw that it was in flames. Patrick found out that the stories people told about him had preceded him, and in a fit of frenzy, his old master gathered all of his treasures into his mansion, set them on fire, and then threw himself into the flames. An ancient record adds that his pride could not endure the thought of being vanquished by his former slave.
Well, you can say St. Patrick was trying to do the right thing, right? He was trying to go pay off his ransom, his debt to this guy in which he had been enslaved, I would say unrightfully enslaved, but just the same, to who he'd been enslaved, and the guy ended up ending himself because he couldn't stand the idea of one of his own slaves doing better than he can. That's kind of sad, actually.
There are a lot of legends surrounding St. Patrick. Some say that he raised people from the dead. Others say that he drove snakes out of Ireland, but since there aren't any fossil records of snakes in Ireland at that time, it's highly unlikely, unless he drove out the fossils as well.
You know, it's really hard to drive a creature from a country that was never in a country to begin with. Or maybe it'd be easy, right? You just say, okay, they were here and now I drove them away. See, they're not here anymore. But seriously, there's never been a snake on the Isle of Ireland, to the best of my knowledge. There's been no fossil records found, also, to the best of my knowledge. However, they did speak many, many times of snakes, and I'm actually going to get into that in later episodes. Barry Fitzgerald has done a lot of work on that, who's originally from Ireland, and shows the idea that the snakes that are seen could actually be the guardians of the portals between the worlds. So that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. However, there's also another possible interpretation of the snakes of Ireland. Check this out.
Many think that snakes was a metaphor for the conversion of the pagans, meaning that he drove paganism out from Ireland.
So the snakes in this case would be more of a metaphoric type, and would be the pagan religion being snakes opposed to the Christian religion, who's supposed to be the good guys. But in all seriousness, it very well could have been referencing the fact that he drove paganism out of Ireland. It was absolutely instrumental in bringing Catholicism to the Irish Isles.
Green wasn't the original color associated with St. Patrick. It was first blue. It eventually changed for various reasons, probably because of being used in various Irish flags and how green is associated with Ireland itself.
So just think, you would be wearing blue all day today instead of green, right? So it's actually got more to do with the story of St. Patrick than just a symbol of the springtime. Because we're always told, St. Patrick's Day, it's in the spring, and the green is just a symbol of the springtime and everything coming back to life. Well, no, not necessarily. It did actually used to be blue for St. Patrick until it got changed over to the Irish traditional color of green. So it has more to do with the country and the country's pride than it does the season in which it's celebrated.
Patrick worked in Ireland for 30 years. Afterwards, he retired and then died on March 17th in AD 461. There wasn't a canonization process when Patrick died. That didn't come up until the 12th century. He would have been declared a saint by acclamation, and his sainthood approved by a local bishop soon after he died.
He wasn't even canonized like a standard saint today, because, again, like he said, that didn't even come around until the 12th century.
St. Patrick's Day was originally a Catholic holiday, and still is, but has also evolved into a secular holiday, being celebrated by non-Irish, non-Catholics, and ironically enough, even atheists.
Well, atheists, like most others, will take pretty well any excuse for a holiday to drink, right? So, yeah, it is celebrated by the variety of peoples who don't even have any connections to Ireland or to the Catholic Church. But in America, it's one of those standard holidays on the calendar, right? It's one of those days that we celebrate with parties and drink and specific Irish foods and kind of a traditional celebration anyway. You would have your traditional Irish foods and whatnot, and yeah, it's one of those things that everybody celebrates, and yet nobody really knows why. It's just something we've done, so we continue to do.
Today, when people think of St. Patrick, they imagine a leprechaun in a green jacket, hat, pipe, clover, and a pot of gold. Not a man who devoted 30 years of his life to teaching and helping the Irish.
And like I said, we'll dig down into the leprechaun traditions over in the second half of the show. We covered the Fae folk just not too long ago when we had some interesting leprechaun stories in there, but we're going to dig deep into just the leprechaun lore here in the second half and really have some fun with that. But before we get to that, just a couple more interesting facts about the St. Patrick.
Today is St. Patrick's Day, and well, there are some forgotten bits of history associated with St. Patrick's Day that are really interesting. So let's start with the man himself, St. Patrick. We really don't know that much about St. Patrick. It's long enough ago that the record is sparse, and much of what we think we know is very difficult to actually prove. What is generally accepted is that he was a Romano-British missionary in Ireland in the 5th century AD, and that he played an important role in the conversion of Ireland from paganism to Catholicism.
And we just heard a little bit about that, and actually we know that St. Patrick or St. Patrice was more than instrumental, but actually a very large part of switching the Celtics and Druids over to the Catholicism or into the Christian faith, which we know Irish Catholic is still today a very well recognized faith of the Irish people.
Significant Christian missionary there, although it's unquestionable that he played a large role in the conversion of Ireland. Importantly, if you didn't know this, he was not himself born in Ireland. He was British.
Born in Britain, I think we heard a little bit ago, in 35 AD, if I'm not mistaken. And he was actually taken to Ireland by slavers, as you remember. And that's how we ended up originally in Ireland before returning to England, like we heard just a little bit ago.
It might also surprise you to find out that St. Patrick was never actually canonized by a pope. For most of the first 1,000 years of the Catholic Church, there was no specific process for canonization. It was a local decision who to venerate. The popes didn't really get involved until around the 10th century, and there was no formal process till around the 12th century. However, St. Patrick is on the Catholic list of saints, and there is a feast day for St. Patrick, and that is largely due to the advocacy of an Irish-born Franciscan friar named Luke Wadding in the 1500s.
So if not for Luke Wadding, we may actually not be celebrating the St. Patrick's Day as we do every year.
There are a few legends of St. Patrick that are really misunderstandings, and one of the most common ones is the argument that St. Patrick freed Ireland from snakes, chased all the snakes off the island. And part of that has to do with the biological fact that there are no native snakes in Ireland. After the last ice age, it got too cold for snakes and then cut off from the continent. They never migrated back. But there were never snakes in Ireland, at least not in St. Patrick's time. Rather, that story, which was told pretty much after his death, was not meant to be taken literally. He has not chased away snakes. It was referring to the conversion of Ireland. St. Patrick was primarily responsible for chasing out the snakes, being the old pagan ways.
And again, that can be totally up for debate with the archaeological record. There is no snake fossils, that is for sure. But seriously, there can be a debate on the true meaning of the snakes in Ireland, and as a matter of fact, that's probably a whole show's worth of debate, to be honest with you. But let's not dwell on that too much, because there's a really interesting piece of information here. Do you think maybe St. Patrick could have brought people back from the dead, the Lazarus Effect, like Jesus did?
Another interesting piece of the St. Patrick legend is that there are several accounts of him bringing people back from the dead, resurrection. And while I'm not really here to take a stand on miracles, it's quite probable that this was not really referring to literal resurrection, but again referring to the conversion of Ireland. Several people, important leaders, at first resisted Patrick, even violently, but later converted to Christianity and became his friend. And that was seen as a resurrection of the soul. Those who were being resurrected were really old pagans that were being brought to the light of Christianity.
I don't know about you guys, but I've never really looked that deeply into St. Patrick before tonight. And I gotta say, there's a lot of symbolism in this, right? The snakes, the resurrection of the dead, all using the Christian symbolism against the pagans. There's way too much symbolic talk in here. I swear they're hiding more information symbolically in Ireland than I ever seen in the English movements of like Freemasons and whatnot. And remember, the first secret of Freemasonry is that the sun is the center of the solar system and the earth goes around the sun, right? That was the first secret. So a lot of these things were told symbolically to pass along secondary information, you know. But that is a lot of symbolism in this story. I gotta say that I'm really intrigued by the fact that they had to talk so secretively. I mean, they were winning the pagan battles. They were clearly transforming all of Ireland. What were they afraid of? Why were they talking so symbolically?
Of course, one of the most persistent stories about St. Patrick is that he used the Irish shamrock as an analogy for the Holy Trinity when bringing Christianity to Ireland. And while that sounds completely plausible, we have no real contemporary record to suggest that actually happened. In fact, the first images that seemed to connect St. Patrick to shamrocks didn't come out until almost 1,200 years after his death.
So the shamrock, or the four-leaf clover, being associated with St. Patrick's and St. Patrick's Day is actually a very modern-day addition to the tradition.
What's maybe more interesting is the way in which the shamrock came to represent Ireland, because it really had to do with British prejudices against the Irish.
Wait, what? How did the four-leaf clover, what's supposed to be this symbol of good luck in Irish legend and whatnot, how did that become what it is today if it was originally imposed as a slander, a slur against the Irish people? The four-leaf clover was actually supposed to be a negative reference to the Irish people, and here's what it actually meant.
Writing in the 15 and 1600s, English botanists suggested that the Irish were wild men who would literally eat clover off the ground like cattle. And while there's no evidence that the Irish ever actually ate clover, that particular representation stuck until the shamrock came to be the symbol of Ireland.
So instead of representing good luck, the shamrock is actually supposed to represent the crazy wild men of Ireland that were so out of their mind and berserker that they actually were just eating up the clover of the field. Okay, that's interesting, because you just wouldn't think that something that's got such a wonderful, happy, connotation behind it of luck and good and all the pleasures, if you will, the idea that it's going to bring you happiness and joy and all the lucky things are going to happen. Apparently, the actual connection comes from a slur and a slander against the Irish people as being wild, crazy guys that eat the clovers of the field. That's interesting. Well, to me, four-leaf clovers will always be considered lucky, right? What about you guys?
March 17th represents St. Patrick's death, and it has been celebrated as a religious holiday in Ireland at least since the 9th or 10th century, as St. Patrick came to be seen as the patron saint of Ireland. It was added to the feast calendar for the Catholic Church and the Church of Ireland in the 17th century.
And today we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, like I mentioned earlier, by going out and getting drunk and, having a great time and wearing green, and we really don't think a whole lot about it. It's a fun time for Americans, right? It's just another excuse to go out and have a party, right? Well, that wasn't the actual way it was celebrated in the beginning.
But in Ireland, the celebration was rather a somber religious celebration. You would go to Mass in the morning, you would celebrate a feast in the afternoon, but there were no parties, there were no parades, there was certainly no drinking of green beer, partly because the Irish as a rule don't dye their beer, but as a religious holiday the pubs wouldn't even be open. It wasn't clear until the 1960s that pubs started to be open on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland.
So once again, the way that we now traditionally celebrate St. Patrick's Day is a very, very new version of the tradition.
So how did it become the sort of wild celebration of all things Irish that we see today? The vision of a parade-driven, party-driven celebration of all things Irish really developed in the United States, which has always had a large Irish immigrant population. The first St. Patrick's Day parade in the United States was in 1766, and that was Irish soldiers in the British Army marching in New York to demonstrate their Irish heritage. And we've been holding parades here for St. Patrick's Day at least since the 1770s. Today there's more than 100 cities in the United States that hold St. Patrick's Day parades, and the ones in Boston and New York are among the oldest civilian parades in the world. The St. Patrick's Day parade in New York generally will include 150,000 marchers in a 5-hour-long procession that will have more than 3 million people along the parade route.
And I've spoken more than once how I'm from Tennessee, and there was a town just south of where I was from that was called Erin, or Erin Go Bragh was their main slogan, and there was an Irish town. And I always wondered how that happened. The Irish immigrants were brought in to build the railroads in the area, and once the railroads were in the area were done, they basically told them, get lost, have a good life. So they went down south a little bit and created their own little Irish town, and they have this big St. Patrick's Day Irish parade every year that I used to go to. Now, it isn't as big as a New York City parade by any means. It's a very small town, but it's a very proud Irish town. So I would think of that every year, that parade that I used to go to for so many years in Tennessee, in that Irish town of all places in Tennessee.
The popularity of St. Patrick's Day in America has a lot to do with the sheer size of the Irish American population. There are 34.5 million Americans of Irish descent, and to put that into perspective, that means that there are 7 times as many Irish Americans as there are people living in Ireland.
That's an interesting statistic right there. We have more Irish in America than the Irish that are in Ireland. That's weird.
Celebrating St. Patrick's Day with a parade is a good way for Irish Americans to recognize each other, to celebrate their history. It is a way to fight the discrimination that often came against Irish immigrants. And it is a way to show political forces how important the Irish vote is. There has been a little bit of politics involved. For example, the wearing of green.
We always associate green with St. Patrick's Day, like I said earlier, but it's not necessarily because of the color of spring. Check this out.
Contrary to popular belief, the connection between St. Patrick's Day and green has nothing to do with the color of the hills in Ireland. It has to do with Irish politics. The color green has represented the move for Irish independence ever since the Irish Rebellion of 1641.
So the color green being used was actually for a representation of independence of the Irish people and not of the color of spring. It might be a color some of us need to adopt here in the U.S., I'm just saying.
And increasingly emphasize the wearing of green in the United States, and even pinching people who don't wear green, which occurred in the middle of the 19th century, represented Irish American support for Irish independence.
Man, didn't you hate that, getting pinched for not wearing green? Oh, I used to hate that on St. Patrick's Day, right? Well, now you know where the tradition actually came from. It has nothing to do with St. Paddy's Day. It actually has to do with enforcing Irish independence, something I would have never guessed.
Today, the celebration of St. Patrick's Day has gone so mainstream that the political connotations have really disappeared. It's more of a broad celebration of Irish culture and immigrant culture altogether. It's celebrated now worldwide. In fact, it is celebrated in more countries than any other national holiday. Ironically, it has been the Irish that have been kind of late to come to the party. Only in the mid-1990s, as a way to support tourism, that Ireland proclaimed the National St. Patrick's Day Festival, which is now 5 days long, as a way to attract people and help represent Irish culture. But even in Ireland, it's been approached with kind of that Irish sense of humor, maybe best represented by the town of Dripsey in County Cork, which held the shortest St. Patrick's Day parade in 1999, 24 meters between the town's one pub and the town's other pub. Went on annually for 5 years until one of the pubs closed.
That's actually kind of sad that the pub closed. I bet that was fun for the drunk revelers of the parade to march between the two of them and continue drinking on both sides, right?
Today, there's some criticism of St. Patrick's Day as having become too commercialized and too focused on alcohol, and it does drive somewhere on the order of $4.5 billion in business. And there are people, especially in Ireland, calling to go back to some of the religious roots of the holiday. Now, I'm not going to take a stand on that, but I am going to say that if you're celebrating today or tipping back a pint of dyed beer, maybe you should take just a few moments to consider the rich history of this holiday.
And a very rich history it has indeed. A history that part of which I had no idea about. How about you guys? But there is one thing we do know about. In the paranormal world, we talk about the Fae, or the little people, or the Leprechauns. That's right. We're going to discuss the fun side of St. Patrick's Day, the Leprechauns and the little people, in just a moment, right after these messages, in the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show. So you guys stay right there, and we'll be right back. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. It's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. Are you enjoying this special St. Patrick's Day broadcast from Jerry Hicks in the Darkwolf's Den? I know I am. If you are and you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell, and you'll get our notifications every time we go live. We're here every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, bringing you the very best of Common Sense Radio the Rippin' Rabbit Hole. Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den will return again tomorrow night, Thursday, March 18th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Howl with him as he explores the den of musicians and UFOs. I don't know exactly what that correlation is, but I can't wait. I'm excited. Then Friday, March 19th, I'll return back again with the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show as we explore doppelgangers. Do you perchance have somebody out there which is an exact replica of you and you haven't met that person yet? Or maybe you have. Tune in Friday, March 19th, and we'll explore doppelgangers together. Then Saturday night, our 4th annual Freedom Flame broadcast. I couldn't be more excited. Get your candles ready to light as we celebrate the Freedom Flame in our 4th annual tradition of the Freedom Flame broadcast. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It makes no difference what your political affiliation is. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, we'll come together and celebrate united our freedom. Then we'll end out the weekend right together Sunday night with a look at magnetic personalities. Are you drawn to people, or perhaps are people drawn to you? Find out Sunday, March 21st, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, as we end out the weekend right together. Now, today we had a little bit of a mishap again with MailChimp, and we weren't able to send out our morning schedule, but we have posted everything online at rippinrabbithole.com. That's RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Once you're there, click on Listen Live on-air schedule, and you'll see everything that we're going to explore this weekend together, and it's going to go fast, real fast. But we're going to return back to our St. Patrick's Day special with Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. From the very best in Common Sense Radio, happy St. Patrick's Day to you. You're listening to the Rippin' Common Sense Radio Network, the Rippin' Rabbit Hole.
Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Little green hat and boots so brown. Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Can you catch one sneaking around? He's got a secret pot of gold hiding at the end of a rainbow, and you can try and find it, but you'll never win. Get a 4-leaf clover and try again. Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Tiny little trickster from Ireland. Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Maybe, just maybe, you can make him your friend. Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Little green hat and boots so brown. Have you ever seen a leprechaun? Can you catch one sneaking around? Maybe, just maybe, he'll be your friend. Hello.
This is My Life DIY, and
Hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Oz.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Rippin' Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Mita. aka propagate this light.
And you're now listening
to DarkWolf's Den.
The DarkWolf's Den Show on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the DarkWolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the DarkWolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. St. Patrick's Day, that's right, whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have discussed St. Patrick's Day, the history of St. Patrick's Day, and some not so well-known facts about St. Patrick and the holiday in general. But now we're going to focus a little bit closer. This, of course, is a paranormal show, and we would be remiss if we did not touch on the most paranormal creature of all of the St. Patrick's Day, and that is, of course, the lucky little leprechaun, of course. And we are going to discuss that here in the second half. But where did the leprechaun come from? What is the leprechaun, right? There are actually a lot of misconceptions in Western culture as to what a leprechaun actually is. And what we're going to hear tonight is information that it was pretty new to me, so some of you may not have heard it either.
Close your eyes and imagine a small, tipsy man in green, hoarding gold at the end of a rainbow. You know this guy. He's a leprechaun. The modern leprechaun, the diminutive green figure with a jovial smile, red beard, jaunty hat, and a pot of gold unfairly associated with St. Patrick's Day, is practically ubiquitous as a symbol of luck and mischief in Western pop culture.
And if you remember our episode on fairies, you'll know that leprechauns are actually just another version of the fae folk.
He's the official mascot of sports teams, the subject of a ridiculous slasher horror series, and the face of a deliciously sugary cereal.
And there's nothing like a good sugary breakfast cereal like Lucky Charms, right?
And trust me, you know you've gone mainstream when you've achieved the status of spokesmonster.
I would say the leprechaun is definitely a very much a mainstream cryptid monster creature type, if you will.
But the traditional leprechaun is a fairy rooted in Irish lore, known for his skills as an industrious craftsman, and a bit more threatening than you might realize. He is tied to the ancient mythology of Ireland and the real history of Irish immigrants to the United States. And yes, he's also a mischievous little creature with a penchant for gold.
And of course, around here, we look at myths as more of real history than we do as legends and stories, if you will.
While many modern Gaelic speakers prefer to use the spelling leprechaun, leprechaun is the more common version outside of Ireland. Leprechaun is an anglicized version of one of the many Celtic versions of the name. Which one in particular? Well, there are a couple of contenders since this guy has a lot of names.
It's something like 15 different names that this creature is called by, depending on where you are in Ireland.
That's because different regions in Ireland all call this fairy creature something distinctive. Despite the variety of names across the country, traditional leprechaun traits remain consistent. He is a solitary fairy, rarely appearing with others of his kind or associating with other fairy species socially.
Which is an interesting little fact that will come back up here in just a little bit. It'd actually be very important.
He is always old, wizened, oddly attired, and very small, ranging from a few inches to a couple of feet tall.
And of course, being a fae folk, they would be a little people anyway, right?
He's always male. And another thing that remains the same across the board, the leprechaun's profession. This fairy creature is a shoemaker, hence the tiny leather apron seen in most traditional representations.
So she brings up an interesting point here, and it's a point we point out here on the show quite a bit. The mythologies match. All the way across all of Ireland, the mythologies say the same thing about this creature. So when we find case files anytime that have a multitude of witnesses across a different variety of areas who are saying they've seen the exact same thing, then you start to wonder if there isn't something going on across these case files, right?
So where do we see variety in the leprechaun? Well, for one thing, his odd attire. In some regions, he wears old-style clothes, with one or more items of red clothing, buckles on his shoes, and a magical hat that allows him to disappear at will and travel long distances.
And you remember a moment ago I mentioned that the solitary thing would be important, and it is because the reason that the leprechauns wear red clothing opposed to green, actually, is because they are solitary outcasts, basically, of the Fae folk. So the color they wear is red to show that they are loners, they are outcasts, they're by themselves. So it's really interesting that they've actually got rules for that. And the Western culture always pictures the leprechaun as a little guy dressed in green, but in the original stories, more often than not, he was dressed in red more than green.
Other accounts have him rocking an Elizabethan ruff and lace frills at his wrists.
William McShakespeare, right? I'm totally kidding. Shakespearean-style leprechauns. That's interesting, though.
On the West Coast, he wears an overcoat to protect against the cold weather.
This sounds to me just like a necessity for any leprechaun that would live there anyway, just because it's a cold area, right?
In Leinster, they wear a green suit and hat with a wide belt buckle and boots, which is likely where the modern version of the leprechaun gets its look from.
So this is our classic leprechaun, our green-hooded, green-footed, fully green with a belt buckle hat. That's where the classic leprechaun comes from that we all know and love today.
Many experts agree that two other solitary fairies of Celtic lore, the Cluracan and the Fierbog, are actually just variants of the leprechaun. The Cluracan is known for stealing liquor from cellars and becoming very drunk, and thus you could say it's just a leprechaun on a boozy binge. The Fierbog, or Red Man, is a practical jokester, a leprechaun in red with a bit of a mean streak.
And like I said before, in traditional Fae folk lore, there is the idea that the reason they wear red is because they are solitary creatures. But what I find also very interesting is that these creatures all have the same profession across the board. No matter what area they're found in, no matter what the story is of the leprechaun, from what area it comes, they always have the same profession.
So, about that cobbling. The leprechaun are renowned for their work crafting beautiful shoes. They even make dancing slippers for the other fairies. In fact, while conducting his research of folklore in Ireland, William Butler Yeats was told that the creature's name comes from Lebrog, meaning one shoemaker. Expert cobbling is a lucrative trade, and so leprechauns are very wealthy.
So they are always master shoemakers. I remember this story when I was a kid of the elves in the shoe shop that would go in and make the shoes overnight. But apparently that was the story of leprechauns, right? If the elves are the shoe shop elves, they're the leprechauns. That's interesting that they make that specific profession and gain such wealth from it. Wealth that they love to use, of course, to drink with. But it also leads them to another one of their favorite pastimes.
This leads to their other great and familiar passion, being fiercely protective of their gold. Leprechauns are said to have caches of gold hidden across Ireland, and they always carry a full purse full of gold coins. Using charms and craftiness, they hoard their treasures in mountains, woods, caves, and rocks.
And according to some legends, trees. If you remember our fairy folk episode a while back, once again, there was a story in there about a guy who caught a leprechaun and found his pot of gold in the tree, but he wasn't able to retrieve it. I think it was under the tree, actually. So he tied a ribbon around it and said, don't untie that ribbon, just leave it here. So the leprechaun agreed. He left the ribbon and tied a ribbon around all the other trees in the woods also. So the guy come back and didn't know which one was the correct tree. They're sneaky little devils and will go to any length possible to protect their treasure, including a supposed charmed gold coin that they use to escape their captors a lot of times. They hold up the gold coin, and I guess the captors kind of turn around and walk the other way. I'm not sure there, but it's definitely a distraction that they use a lot.
Another thing the leprechaun is reportedly fond of? Throwing furniture around when frustrated. They are apparently small but mighty, which feels personally familiar. They are known to steal food, and when feeling a bit lazy, sometimes they'll hop on the back of a sheep to get around.
So next time you are out in a field and see a sheep walking around, not the common field of the public, the other type of sheep, the real sheep, the one with the fur, if you happen to be in a field full of those, look closely, you might find a leprechaun hitching a ride.
They do grant wishes, which is why they are associated with luck, but they always demand something in return. Take the story Master and Man from Thomas Crofton Crocker's 1825 Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland.
This is actually a pretty good story about a man that meets a leprechaun. Check this out. It's definitely not your classic leprechaun story.
Billy, a man who loved his drink and a good fight, is returning home on the night of a full moon when he wishes he had a drop of good liquor to keep a man's soul from freezing in him. Suddenly, a little man in a three-cornered hat.
For those that don't know what a three-corner hat is, think of a pirate's hat.
Bound all about with gold lace and with great silver buckles in his shoes, holds out a glass as large as he is and says, "Never wish it twice, Billy." Billy happily accepts the drink and downs it. But then the leprechaun demands payment. Billy insults the leprechaun, who angrily declares, "You shall be my servant for 7 years and a day, and that is the way I will be paid." He warns Billy that if he fails to meet him the next night, his situation will be even worse. Billy heeds this warning and ends up serving the leprechaun for years with little question. His duties include a lot of magical breaking and entering, helping the leprechaun drink wine from the cellars of rich men. So maybe the leprechaun wanted a drinking buddy?
That sounds a lot like the aforementioned Chloricon opposed to the standard leprechaun.
While leprechauns can imprison humans for their advantage, a human can also reciprocate, capturing a leprechaun to steal his gold by exchanging his release for the treasure. However, this exchange sounds easier than it is. Confronted with a choice between his freedom and his precious riches, the wily leprechaun may offer his captor 3 wishes instead of the loot or some other temptation.
And of course, this connects right back over to the jinn. If you remember the jinn of the Middle Eastern culture, and the stories of the genies that would grant wishes, the 3 wishes that never go right, this would be a Irish version, in my opinion, of the jinn, the leprechaun granting wishes. At least it brings to mind that same type of creature.
If the human captor falls for it, they find themselves up against a confounding riddle or ruse as the means to the wishes, and more often than not will be tricked into freeing the leprechaun, losing out on both treasure and wishes.
They are undoubtedly a wily and very, very smart and crafty creature indeed.
Sort of like in the story The Little Shoe. The story tells of a man who once caught a leprechaun. One day, after cutting peat, he returns to his stable. When he gets to the stable door, he hears hammering and someone whistling, the prettiest tune he ever heard in his whole life before. He thinks it is a Chloricon, or leprechaun, and decides to catch him. He opens the door silently and peers around, locating the little fellow under a horse, wearing an apron and sporting a red nightcap, making a shoe. The shoemaker is so involved in the work that he fails to notice the human, who catches him with his bare hands. The man demands the leprechaun's purse. The leprechaun says he will go get it for the man, who foolishly loosens his hand, allowing the little cobbler to escape, laughing all the while. But he left the little shoe behind and the man took it, reveling in its tiny beauty for the rest of his life.
I would say the tiny shoe that the leprechaun was wearing was worth any amount of gold that I could have ever got from that leprechaun.
This story also comes from Croker's collection. The author and folklorist would later argue that leprechauns, in all their variations, are what the Irish call pygmy peoples. Could he be saying that these legends are based on real people of shorter stature? Well, there isn't any archaeological evidence to suggest that's true.
So when was the earliest account of a leprechaun?
The earliest written reference appears long before Croker's seminal work in the 7th or 8th century text, The Adventures of Fergus, Son of Letty. In this medieval story, a king falls asleep on a beach and awakens to find himself being dragged into the ocean by 3 leprechauns. He manages to turn the tables and capture the creatures himself, and they agreed to grant him 3 wishes in exchange for their release.
So that's 9 wishes by my count. That's a lot of wishes. I wonder how that turned out, right? That's pretty cool. What would you do with 9 wishes, right? What would you do with 3? But what would you do with 9? Like, you think you could, like, do the infinite wish thing at that point? Like, get immortality? I don't know. I'm really, like, going off on a tangent on that one, ain't I? But the next story, actually, it brings back into question the idea of the little people being pygmies of the island. And there could be a bit more historical reference fact in here than what you may think.
Then there's the story of the Fierbog, a legendary race of small people who invaded Ireland after fleeing persecution in Greece. According to the myth, they were born from Nemed's son Starn and became some of the first inhabitants to rule over Ireland. Their reign was short-lived, however, as less than 40 years later, the Fierbog were conquered by the Tuatha De Danann, a mighty supernatural race.
Oh, that just gets on my nerves. I was on Creepy Little Book, my buddy Pete's channel last night, and we were talking about the creatures here that she's speaking of, and it's the Tuatha De Danann, not the Tuatha De Danann or whatever she just called it. This is one that I don't know why. It's one of those pet peeves, weird things I have. But every time I hear this pronounced incorrectly, it just grinds on my nerves, right? So it is Tuatha De Danann. Tuatha De Danann. We've all heard of these. These are the, quote, Irish mythical gods, end quote. But it's interesting that the different folklores are crossing paths here. You've got the folklore of the little people that escaped Greece and came into Ireland, ruled for about 40 years before the Tuatha De Danann came in and took over.
According to Celtic mythology, the Tuatha De Danann are skilled in magic and were banished from the heavens because of their great knowledge.
So they were an ancient race of people that were skilled at magic and kicked out of the heavens. That's interesting enough. Remember, any sufficient technology beyond our understanding would appear to us as magic. I mean, who knows? Perhaps the Tuatha De Danann or even the leprechauns or the fae folk or all of them could be aliens that have come to Earth. It is not the craziest hypothesis to be suggested.
They built grand palaces underground, rumored to contain unimaginable treasures that very few humans would ever get to see. Considered immortal gods, the Tuatha De Danann are not just part of the foundation of Irish mythology, but are actually representative of the intersection between folklore and history itself.
And these are the crossroads where we love to hang out and inspect, right? Where the history and the mythical folklore actually meet together. This is interesting. Check this out.
After all, the story goes on to tell of a battle between the Tuatha De Danann and the very people who would become the ancestors of the modern Irish. So are they legend or history? In fact, magical beings like the Fierbog, the Tuatha De Danann, and the Leprechaun are featured throughout Irish folklore, leading to this conflation of myth and reality. For example, until as late as the 17th century, the Tuatha De Danann were regarded as a true race.
So it's only been very recently, generally speaking, that the Tuatha De Danann were given a mythical status and not considered a real race of people, which I think is actually a tragic loss because it could be a story telling us a whole lot more than what is telling us on the surface. And this is the problem with scientism, is it ignores what has been clearly conceived and accepted for many years to lay its own narrative upon it based on whatever they say it is. And earlier it said there's no archaeological evidence of little people in Ireland, but I dare to beg the question, would they admit it if they found it?
So we've talked about the hardworking jokester leprechaun who protects his gold and can grant wishes. But what about the more malicious, drunken fellow sowing chaos and stealing babies? Well, around the start of the 5th century CE, as Christianity became the dominant religion in Ireland, the ancient pagan stories of, not to mention actual belief in, fairies like the leprechaun still lingered. However, over time, these impish creatures are cast in an increasingly negative light, the stories becoming darker and the creatures more menacing.
So they basically run a smear campaign on these creatures. For something that clearly, supposedly didn't exist, they sure were worried about them having an influence, weren't they?
Until we begin to see tales in which leprechauns would replace babies with changelings, fairy children, or murder potential treasure thieves, rather than just trick or deter them. Outside of Ireland, the popularity of the leprechaun rose later, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most notably because of its appearance in Thomas Crofton Crocker's widely admired collection of Irish lore. But there were other contributing factors as well. Beginning in the mid-19th century, as the Irish fled their famine-stricken homeland to England and the United States, we see an infusion of leprechaun lore and notoriety in the folk stories of those countries,
as they brought along with them the tales of the leprechaun. And perhaps they brought more than that. Perhaps they brought the leprechauns themselves. Perhaps they jumped on the ship while they were having the Christian smear campaign. And maybe the majority of them have exited Ireland and come to the Americas also. I mean, if you get this many Irish people in America, more than in Ireland, who knows, there might be a large variety of the fae folk here in America. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think the fae folk could be real? Did you know all the facts we went over earlier about St. Patrick's Day? Did you know the real reasons that green was considered in St. Patrick's Day, or the reasons that leprechauns are actually considered in the St. Patrick's celebrations, or what the leprechauns actually originally were? I could have actually done a whole episode on these, but I kind of did already with the fairy folk, so I'm glad it was only the second half. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's real? Do you think there's still fairy folk and leprechauns today that are hiding gold and making horseshoes and cobbling different things together? Or do you think it's all just a little bit of St. Patty's Day drunkenness fun? In the end, ladies and gentlemen, all you can do is look at the evidence, apply a little common sense, and you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right. That's it for this episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat. And we're so glad you chose us to be right there with you. The den may be closing for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, but don't you worry. The weekend fun has only just begun. That's right. Make sure you come back tomorrow, Thursday, March 18th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows here on the network start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. I'm going to be talking tomorrow night about musicians and UFOs. There is a very intriguing link between ufology and the music industry, and it's one that I actually hadn't put together until I found the information that I found the other day. And I'm going to share that information with you tomorrow, Thursday, March 18th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, on an all-new episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show right here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio and the rippinrabbithole.com. Speaking of Rippin' Rabbit, our buddy AJ the Rippin' Rabbit will be back on the airwaves on Friday, March 19th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, with an all-new episode of the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. That's right, it's going to be a fun one this weekend, as if every weekend isn't absolutely incredible, right? But this one will be no different. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. On Friday, he's going to be talking about doppelgangers. That's right. Have you ever met your doppelganger? They say there's somebody that matches and looks just like every single one of us in this world. I haven't found mine yet, but I've been told by multiple people that they have found my doppelganger in a couple other states that I don't live in. So there is a doppelganger out there, they say, for everyone. And AJ will be discussing doppelgangers and such an amazing topic. Perhaps he's found his. I might have to ask him if he's ever run into somebody that looks like him, right? If he's ever met his own doppelganger. Go ahead and make sure you check him out, or his doppelganger perhaps, on Friday, March 19th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then on Saturday, March 20th, 2021 is a very, very extremely special episode here on the network. It is the 4th annual Freedom Flame broadcast. That's right. It is something you want to be a part of for sure. It is something that around here we are extremely, incredibly passionate about. I am so very passionate when it comes to freedom. I am one of those people that I will stand up for freedoms and your freedoms as well as mine to the death of me. And freedom is something that we all cherish and need to cherish and not take for granted. And it's definitely something we're all going to celebrate on Saturday, March 20th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central is Ripon, Wisconsin. And the live cam from the Little White Schoolhouse and the Freedom Flame is presented. And we have our very special and amazing Freedom Flame broadcast. I'm not going to ruin the surprises by giving away the story, but it's definitely a story that is more than incredible and one that you do not want to miss. This is an extremely special episode here at the network. And I would really ask that you have everybody you know here that night. That is your Bring a Friend night here on the network. Invite everybody and anybody you know, because this transcends political parties. This is not about a Republican or a Democrat. This is not about any other paranormal or weird topic. This is about freedom, and freedom in its purest form. The freedom flame that burns for all Americans. That's right. So make sure you check it out Saturday, March 20th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network and the RippinRabbitHole.com. And on Sunday, rounding out the weekend right, our buddy AJ the Rippin' Rabbit to come back one last time with a Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show about a magnetic personality. That's right. Do you have a magnetic personality? Do you draw people to you easily? Do you make friends easily? Or is it something that you struggle with? Well, AJ will be discussing the tips and tricks of having a magnetic personality, I'm sure, on Sunday, March 21st, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. And that's going to round out the weekend here on Ripon Common Sense Radio and Rippin' Rabbit Hole. And speaking of the RippinRabbitHole.com, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you hop on over there to the RippinRabbitHole.com. That is RippinRabbitHole.com. That's right. Over there, you're going to sign up for your backstage pass. Really simple and easy. Our buddy Pete over at Creepy Little Books signed up last night and hung out in the backstage lounge with us. That's right. One of the many perks you'll get for signing up for the backstage pass. Come on back and hang out with us in the 24/7 backstage lounge. There's always a group of us back there every evening. Usually all of us normal rabbits that hang out all the time, and we would love to have you join us and join the conversation and add your 2 cents, if you will. It is always a wonderful time back there. Like I said, Pete hung out back there with us last night. We had a blast. Another perk you're going to get by signing up for this backstage pass is you're going to get a weekly email from us. We're going to send you our schedule every Wednesday, so you'll know what is coming up on the Rabbit Holes and the DarkWolf's Den shows and all the amazing topics like the Freedom Flame broadcast. And you'll be able to share that out to your friends, family, family's friends, friends, family, and everybody else that you know. And you'll be able to get everybody and bring a friend on Saturday, March 20th to the Freedom Flame broadcast, for instance. And you wouldn't have known about that if you didn't get the email to send out to your friends on Wednesday. As a matter of fact, today, the rabbits got the email, and they now know all of the topics for the entire week right here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio, because we are the most extended weekends in radio, ladies and gentlemen. Our weekends start on Wednesday and end on Sunday. We do 2-day work weeks, and that's all we really need, right? I'm trying to push for 0-day work weeks, but I'm getting there, guys. We can only do so much at a time, right? On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I want to wish everybody a very happy, wonderful, and safe St. Patrick's Day. It has been my honor and pleasure to do these presentations for you tonight, and I very much look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Also, the International Mandela Effect Conference and myself today did the IMAC Open Tables on the International Mandela Effect Conference YouTube page, so do make sure you check that out. It was Season 1, Episode 2, The Golden Timeline. That's right. There's stuff in there that you definitely are going to enjoy. Some of the best sponsors for that show I think I've seen so far. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. My name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. On behalf of AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, Wald House, Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, everybody involved with Rippin' Common Sense Radio, our amazing mod team, everybody that has helped put this show together and has helped us do everything we've done in the last year. We thank you so very much, and we look forward to many, many more amazing episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all these folks, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time, stay awake, but dare to dream. Have a great night, everybody. Yeah, that's right.
Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever home. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her?